Okay, so we're on Zion Amud Aleph, about 10 lines up from the bottom, or 11 lines, 2 dots. I'm Reb Chelbo, 7A3 at the pretty much the beginning. I'm Reb Chelbo, I'm Reb Huna, I'm Reb Abba Bar Zavda, I'm Raf. Reb Chelbo is in the name of Reb Huna, in the name of Reb Abba Bar Zavda, in the name of Ram. Achas Besula v'achas almana tu'una bracha. Whether the bride is a previously married woman or whether she is a first-time married woman, you need to make a bracha. So Rashi says this is talking about birkas chasanim. So in the course of the Gemara here, we'll talk about the different possible brachos and what they are. Umiyama Rav Huna Hachi, did Rav Huna really say this? Rav Huna Almana Inatuna Bracha. Rav Huna says that a previously married woman who is getting remarried, that you don't need to make a bracha at her wedding. So lo kasha, kan ba'bachar shenas almana, kan ba'almana shenas almana. So it's not a contradiction. There's a difference if it depends who the groom is. If she's marrying a man who is also previously married, then there is no bracha. But if she's marrying a man who's getting married for the first time, in that case, there is a bracha. It doesn't matter that she's been previously married or not. But if a man and a woman who had both been previously married get married, they don't need to make the bracha for their marriage, or the bracha doesn't need to be made. The Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Lihuna Bar Nasan, Tana, Rav Nachman said that Rav Huna Bar Nasan said that we learned in Braisa Minayin leberchas chasanim basara. How do we know that the bracha for grooms, but the literal translation of berchas chasanim is the bracha of grooms, is with a minyan? Shanamar, as the pasuk says, "Vayikach asara anashim miziknei oyer vayomer shvu po vayeshuvu." And they took 10 men from the elders of the city, and he said, "Sit here," and they sat. And what was that case from? That was when Boaz was marrying Rus, and Boaz was a widower. Rus was a widow. They both were previously married, and this is the source that you need a minyan for berchas chasanim. So obviously, you have to have a bracha when a widow with two previously married people are getting married. Uboaz almon shenas almona hava, and Boaz was a widower who was marrying a widow. So now we have to give a different answer. So my eina tuna bracha, the Amar Rav Huna. So when Rav Huna says that the almana doesn't need a bracha, what do we mean? Eina tuna bracha called Zion. We don't need to make the bracha for all 7 days. Aval yomacha tuna bracha, but she needs a bracha for 1 day. Meaning, what does that mean? What we call sheva brachos, and the Gemara is going to talk about it when we turn the page, is that there's 7 brachos, but those are made not just at the chuppah, but they're also made at meals for the next 7 days. So if a widow is marrying a widow, or people who are previously married are getting married, they need a bracha for 1 day, but they don't need a bracha for all 7 days. Tanya, but what about the fact that we learned in the Braisa before? That the chachamim were meticulous, or they cared about the proper care for the Jewish girls, that the husband had to celebrate with her for 3 days. So b'mai. So we spoke about this in the context of a woman who is getting married for at least the second time. She can't get married on that the marriage would be consummated Thursday night, because if it would be consummated before that, the next morning her husband might go to work the day after the wedding on Friday. So therefore they said consummate the marriage late at night, so that the husband won't go to work the next day because of this takana. That was what we mentioned this. So what's this takana that they had to be happy for 3 days? If it's for a previously unmarried, this is saying the chasan, the bachar, but then you just said you need a bracha for 7 days. And if it's for a previously married man, you just said he needs a bracha for 1 day. So it's either 7 days or 1 day. So where does the takana of 3 days come into play? So so one answer I can give you is that for a previously married man, the bracha is only for 1 day, but there is simcha for 3 days. And if you want, I could say bebacher shiva lebracha shlosh l'simcha. Even for a first time wedding, the bracha is for 7 days, even though the simcha is only for 3 days. What are the brachos? We're going to turn the page. We're going to see what they are. Okay, but there's the shava brachos. So one thing that that's a little strange is we know that we learned that if everything was, all the preparations for the wedding were ready, and then the father of the chasan or the mother of the kala died, they bring the body into a different room and they have the wedding, and they have the 7 days of feast and then the 7 days of shiva. So what exactly is this simcha talking about over here? Because there's a halacha, not just for that halacha, but there's another halacha. Let's say chasan has something that looks like tsaras. So the halacha is you wait till after the the 7 days are over, at least for the first time chasan, and then the kohen looks at it because he doesn't want to put a damper on his simcha to declare him that he has tsaras during his week after he got married. So it seems that the simcha of a chasan, it's at least it's a private simcha. It's not a simcha like a yantif, because a yantif is a communal. But there's the idea of a private yantif. For example, if you're making a bris, you're either the father or the sandik or the moel. You have a private yantif on that day. And so, for example, if it's let's say Tisha B'av, we'll take an extreme example. If it's Tisha B'av, that's pushed off, according to some opinions, Machlokas Gran Magen Avraham, that they can break their fast early if Tisha B'av fell on Shabbos and was postponed to Sunday, and there's a bris on Sunday. They can break their fast in the early afternoon because it's a private yantif for them because of the bris. So it's not a communal yantif. Not everyone else can break their fast, but they could break their fast. And also, we know in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, certain families had a family day that they would bring a special korban or a special wood to the Beis Hamikdash, and that day was a holiday for that family. So it's a private simcha. And the Gemara talks about that also because in that case, there was a family they used to bring wood on the 10th of Av. And what happened if Tisha B'av fell out on Shabbos and was pushed off to Sunday? So then the day that was their family holiday was in conflict with Tisha B'av, similar to what we just said about a bris. So there's an idea of a private holiday. So what is the simcha for 3 days about if we know that for certain halachos, the simcha lasts for 7 days for the chassan? So I don't know. I don't know the answer. Okay, mezakeh, we turn the page now to Zayin Amud Beis. Mevorchin lebsula shiva l'almana yom echad. So it's important to remember that in the previous Gemaras, we were talking about the brachos in regard to whether the chasan was a first-time chasan or was not a first-time chasan. Here, we're saying it in terms of the status of the kala. We make a bracha for a virgin, so a first-time marriage, for 7 days, and for a widow for 1 day. So why don't we say that this is talking about a widow, and even if so, her bracha is 1 day always, even if she would marry a man who's getting married for the first time, which is in conflict to what we just said. We just said the few lines up on the previous amud that the bachar always needs 7 days of brachos. So the Gemara says lo la'alma. When it says a widow is has a bracha for 1 day, that's if she's marrying a man who's previously married. But if she's marrying a man who's getting married for the first time, they would make a bracha for 7 days. So that's, if so, there's a few different cases. It's not just 2 cases. It should said if a woman is getting married for the first time, you make a bracha for 7 days. And for a widow, it depends. If she's marrying a man who's getting married for the first time, they also have a bracha for 7 days. And if she's marrying a man who had been previously married, then they only have 1 day. So the Gemara says, Mil subsikta tani. No, we're making it in a very short and straight manner because the lake of Basula de Batzur Meshiva of Lake Almana de Batzur Mecha. There is no Basula virgin who has less than 7 days of brachos, whether she's marrying a first time chasan or a not first time chasan. But V'leik almana de batzur me'achad. There's no widow who has less than 1 day of bracha. But it's possible, depending on who her husband is, she might also have 7 days. Kegufa, we mentioned above, Amr of Nachman, Amr Lihuna Barnasa Tana Minayin Leberchas Chasan Asar. Actually, Huna Barnasan Tana, his name may have been, Tana may have been like his title. I don't know if he's quoting a Bryce or if that was his. I don't know. So I mean, the first time I so Art Scroll says no, it's just he's quoting a brisa. What's the source that you need to have a minyan for these brachos? So it's the pasuk from Rus that Boaz took 10 men from the elders of the city, and he said, "Sit here." So because he was going to be marrying Rus, he needed a minyan. Rabbi Abba said the source from a different pasuk. Bemakheilos baruch Elokim Hashem im kor Yisrael. In a congregation or an assembly, bless Hashem or bless God Hashem from the source of Yisrael. So Rashi points out that here, when it says makor, which means like a source, so it means on the bracha of a source, you need a minyan. So it seems that when people get married and they have kids, so makor seems to do with the fact that they hope that she's going to have a baby. That's one way to understand this pasuk. Obviously, it's not the pshat in the pasuk, but that's Rav Nachman b'hai kra de Rabbi Bo my darish bay. So Rav Nachman, who learned the pasuk from Boaz, what does he learn with the pasuk of with assemblies bless Elokim? He needs it for the following brisa. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir used to say, "Minayin shafilu ubrim shebemeiman amru shir alayam." So how do we know when the Jews sang Az Yasher, when they praised Hashem for splitting the sea and then unsplitting the sea and killing the Egyptians? How do we know that even the fetuses that were in their mother's wombs also sang a song of thanks to Hashem? Shenemar bemakheilos baruch Elokim Hashem im kor Yisrael. With your assemblies, bless God Hashem from the source of Yisrael, meaning that the fetuses who weren't even born yet, they were still in their source, they were still in their mother's wombs, they also joined in singing Shira. Ve'idach. So how does Rabbi Abahu know the statement of Rabbi Meir? Because he's using this pasuk to tell us that you need a minyan for birkas chasanim. Imkein lema krami beten. It should say Hashem from the beten, from the stomachs of Yisrael, to show that they were talking about a baby from the mother's womb. But my makor al iske makor. But from the fact it uses the word makor, it's telling us not just about the babies, but it's telling about makor, Indian about the source. So it's about marriage in general. Rabbi Abahu, b'hai kred of Nachman by Darshman. So Rabbi Abahu, who learns the fact that you need a minyan from bemakheilos, what does he do with the pasuk of Rav Nachman that Boaz gathered 10 people to marry Rus? That he needed to make the drasha of. So remember, at that time, according to the Gemara, there was a big fight, and it was not unanimous that a Moabite woman was allowed to marry a kosher Jewish person. And so even though I don't know, we would nowadays Baruch Hashem, it's not a question because Sancheirav mixed up all the people, so we don't know who's an Egyptian and who's from Moab and who's from Ammon and who's from Amalek and who's from this country and who's Kanani. But in those times when they still did, if let's say an Egyptian wanted to convert, they would they could not marry a kosher Jew until 3 generations. And an Ammoni or a Moavi male, they would never be allowed to marry a kosher Jew. So who would they marry? They could be either marry a mamzer, or they could marry another a convert like them from those nations, or according to some opinions, a convert from another nation. But then the problem is those kids would not necessarily be allowed to marry a kosher. So, as a matter of public policy, shall we say, see, there's a discussion: is there actually a mitzvah to accept gerim? Do we need to have gerim? So there's a source they bring from a Tashbats. I forgot offhand where it is, but some say it's part of the mitzvah of Yahafta Mesager, because we have a special mitzvah besides V'Yahafta L'Recha Kamocha, to love your fellow. We have to love the ger and not to oppress the ger. So some say that it's part of that mitzvah. I think some bring some other sources. I don't remember right now. We're going to see some more gerus conversion related stuff. Not today, but in the next few weeks. There's an important sugya about how to convert children who are not yet bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah age. But so as a matter of public policy, if you know that if you would convert these people and you know that they wouldn't be allowed to marry a kosher person ever, is it the right thing to convert them? So if there's no mitzvah, you could say, okay, as a matter of public policy, it's better not to. Now again, nowadays this doesn't apply because we don't know who is from Ammon, who is from Moab, who's from Egypt. It doesn't matter. We could assume that everyone, is not from those groups, and they could convert and marry kosher Jews immediately. But in the time when they did know, was it the right thing to accept gerim if they wouldn't be allowed to marry a kosher Jew? Because then people have to keep track. That if they're a kosher Jew, they couldn't marry these people's kids, and you have to count the generations and this and that. It's not a simple thing. So if there's a mitzvah to accept gerim, it seems that even though someone wouldn't be allowed to marry into a kosher Jewish family, you would still have to convert them. They want to be Jewish. They want to be Jewish. They want to join the community of Klal Yisrael and to daven and do all the mitzvos. It's be very difficult to tell someone you couldn't do that. And just as a matter of historical record, probably about 50 years ago or a little bit less, it was before my time, but because of certain problems or lax standards for some conversions, someone suggested a moratorium. So let's say for a year, we're not going to accept any gerim. We'll all, strengthen our standards. And in the meantime, we're not going to convert anyone. And I think they said it was Rabbi Teitz from Elizabeth, New Jersey, who rejected that and said, you can't, because there's a mitzvah to accept gerim. So we can't make a temporary moratorium and say we're not accepting gerim for a year. So, according to that perspective, which there's obviously a lot of truth in that, just the question is we have to find the source exactly what the mitzvah is to accept gerim. So if someone wanted to become Jewish, you'd have to allow them to become Jewish, even though they would have other problems, like who would they marry? So up until that time, and the Gemara in Yevamos says that there was a big fight, that a lot of people said that David HaMelech, because his great grandmother was Rus from Moab, not just anyone from Moab wasn't allowed to marry a kosher Jew. So even though it was his great grandmother, the status of being a Moabite remained on him, and he wasn't allowed to marry a kosher Jew. So then Boaz said that he had a tradition that the way to the drush of the pasuk, that a Moavi and an Ammoni are not allowed to enter the community of Israel, meaning they couldn't marry into a kosher Jewish family. That was literally the Ammoni and Moavi, the male Moabites and the male Ammonites, but the females were allowed to marry into a kosher Jewish family right away. Now, again, just in regard to marrying into a kosher family, there's certain nowadays it doesn't really apply for the most part. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it did apply because Kohanim were only able to marry people whose families had known yichus. And so for the most part, they wouldn't marry anyone who was a convert. They would only marry established families, whoever knew they were kosher. And there was actually a special beis din. I shouldn't say special, but one of the base batei din, there was a one or two batei din besides the Sanhedrin on Harabayas. And it seems that the job or the task of one of those batei din was to make sure that all the kohanim who were doing the avoda had yichus on both sides of their families, and therefore they were qualified to do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. But because this drasha was not accepted, Boaz had to gather a minyan to publicly make this drasha, this tradition that he had received, that male Ammoni and male Moavi men were not allowed to enter the community of Israel, but the females were allowed to enter the community of Israel immediately. So Rabbi Abahu says that Boaz took 10 men, not because he was getting married and you needed to make a minyan for the bracha, because we already know that from the pasuk of bemakheilos. But he needed it because he was making this important drasha, which would have massive ramifications of who's allowed to marry into a Jewish family. So that's why he made that made the drasha. Now it's interesting though, the pasuk of bemakheilos, where's that from? That's a pasuk in Tehillim chapter 68. Now, who composed Tehillim? For the most part, was King David. Now, did that pasuk exist in the time of Boaz? Boaz was David's great grandfather. So it's a little strange, according to Rabbi Bo, that the pasuk that they need a minyan, we didn't need to learn it from Boaz because we already had the pasuk in Tehillim. But the pasuk we already had in Tehillim wasn't composed till 4 generations later. So one thing you could say, and let me just look at this. The Gemara in Baba Basra says that Tehillim was compiled by David, but he also included Tehillim from 10 other authors. So some of them, including Rishon, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avram, Korach's sons, there were other people who composed Tehillim. So it's possible that this parak was before David. However, if we read this is in chapter 68, right? So 27. There it is. So the problem is, if you look at the first chapter of that, chapter 68 of Tehillim, Lam Natseach le David Mizmor Shir. David composed this one. So Boaz didn't need a pasuk because he already had this pasuk. So I guess one way of dealing with this is to understand what exactly either some would say that the drush existed and they had to attach it to a pasuk, so they attach it to a pasuk in Tehillim later, but the drush was known before the time of Boaz. And I guess I should say that we know that there's other takanos that we learned from Boaz. There's a machlokas whether they were ready earlier. There's a Gemara we actually learned it in the last parak of Brachos. It's also at the very end of at the end of Makos about greeting people with the name of Hashem, because Boaz said to the harvester people who were working for him, Hashem imachem, Hashem will be with you. And we said, some say that Boaz, because there's already a pasuk from Gidon who was a little bit earlier. Was earlier than Boaz, and so that takan was earlier. Now, Reb Chaim has a Rav Aaron's grandfather had a thing about what was the status of psukim before David wrote it. That again, and this is So, I mean, we understand the Gemara. I'm just saying historically, it doesn't make sense that a pasuk from David HaMelech was known before the time of David's great grandparents, unless there were some type of. Reb Chaim said something to the effect of that there. What was the status of psukim that were going around, but before they were put into Tanakh? So I don't remember the exact details of the way he said it, but the idea is that maybe there were certain things that were going around, and David compiled it in Tanakh. Meaning David wasn't at Har Sinai, wasn't at Kriyas Yamsuf. So how did he know that the babies were singing Shira or whatever? So it could be that there was certain traditions, whatever, and David composed them. So maybe that pasuk was known not in a composition of David, and David included it in this parak of Tehillim. Again, this doesn't change the meaning of the Gemara. Just trying to understand a little bit of how we can understand what the Gemara is saying. So the reason that Boaz gathered 10 people was not to make the birkas chasanim. It was because he needed to publicly meaning in front of 10 people, to make this drasha that female Ammoni and Moavi were allowed to marry kosher Jews. And the reason Rabbi Boaz says this is because how come it says he took 10 elders? If all you need was a minyan, take 10 men. The fact there were elders showed that he wanted chachamim who would either question him to make sure that the drasha was correct. We know that Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan learned together, and every time Rabbi Yochanan would make a statement, Reish Lakish would ask dozens and dozens of questions against it. And Rabbi Yochanan appreciated very much, because he had such a good chavrusa like Reish Lakish, who questioned everything he said. He had to make sure that he said things that made sense and they were accurate. So either it was something like that, or it was more likely that they were elders and they were going to promulgate the teaching. He needed to take people who would then teach this drasha to other people so that everyone would know this halacha. But if it was just for a minyan, Rabbi Boaz says he didn't need to take elders. He could have just taken 10 men to have a minyan. No, so according to Rav Nachman, that's a good point. If if he only needed to make a drasha, losagi de lavasara, he wouldn't have needed a minyan. So he says, no, in Lefursume Nisa. Yeah, even though you don't need a minyan to make a drasha, but you need to publicize it. As they said, Shmuel said to Rav Chana of Bagdasa. So Bagdasa probably is Baghdad. Baghdad was the name of a place. Now we spell it with a D at the end, Baghdad, but it's possible that they spelled it with a tough at the end, a T sound, because T and D, especially if the D's are more the, it's similar to a suf, a thaf, perhaps. So it's quite possible that he was from Baghdad. Gather me 10 people. I'm going to tell you while learning in front of Olyam, that if you acquire something on behalf of a fetus, it gets acquired. So he wanted to say this psak, and he wanted to have it a minyan just so it would be publicized. However, you should know that the Gemara is saying hamazak lo kanev. If you acquire something on behalf of a fetus, the acquisition does not take effect. So there is a principle of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You can do something for the benefit of a person not in front of him. So if someone says, I want to give $1 million to Shmerel, so will you accept it on my behalf? So on his behalf. So even though Shmerel's not there, you make a kinyan, which giving the handkerchiefs, whatever, an act of acquisition to acquire the money on behalf of Shmerel. You're not acquiring it, but by your kinyan, it's letting Shmerel acquire it. So even though Shmuel's not there, but because it's for his benefit, he's going to be getting a big gift. It's for his benefit, so he doesn't have to be there. Now, I think there's a Kesuvos that says that Zachin May Adam doesn't apply. Zachin, this idea of Zachin making Zchia, something that's beneficial for someone, only works if they are acquiring something. But if you're trying to do them a favor by divesting them of something, that doesn't work. So, for example, can you sell someone else's chametz? Someone else that isn't going to sell their chametz on Pesach, before Pesach. So can you tell the rabbi, sell, Beryl's chametz? Because even though Beryl, so there are some rabbis who do that, but I think according to the Kesuvos, it doesn't work. When we acquire for someone not in their presence, that's if we're adding something to their balance sheet, not if we're taking something off their balance sheet, even though it's in their interest not to own chametz on Pesach. But this idea of zachin doesn't work when you're divesting something from someone. Now, in this case, so this principle of zachin le'adam is when it's for a person. Now here, it's for a fetus. The fetus hasn't been born yet. So can you acquire it on behalf of this fetus who hasn't even been born yet? The fetus exists. The woman is pregnant. So Shmuel wanted to paskin this way, that it worked, or Shmuel did paskin that way, but the Gemara is saying we don't paskin. So meaning, and this isn't a strict halacha statement right now, but from the fact, the Tosfos talks about, can you acquire something which hasn't yet entered the world? Meaning, I think the Gemara was asking, someone says, if your wife has a daughter, I want my son to marry your daughter, or something like that. Or maybe it was the opposite case. I have a daughter and your wife is pregnant. If it's a boy, I want your son to marry my daughter. So we don't know. It's not, we don't even know if it's a girl. I mean, in those days, they didn't know. They didn't have the ultrasounds in those days. But that, you can't make a kinyan on something that doesn't exist yet. But so what you could say is an idea, and I'm not saying this is a halachic principle, but as an idea, since the whole idea of zechia is being beneficial for someone not in their presence, so that's if they exist. If it's an uber, if it's a fetus, they're not even born yet, we would be stretching something that is not in their present, and they're not here yet either. So from the fact that we allow the idea of zachin la'adam shlo b'fanav, we're allowed to do something beneficial for someone not in his presence. Now, I think also just a classic case, I think the Gemara Gittin says, if someone is freeing their slave, so if the slave isn't there, can the master give the shtar shichror, the emancipation document for that slave to someone else? So the guy is acquiring his freedom. So is that a zechia? That's a benefit for him, even not in his presence. But so the thing is that because that's already a bit of a jump to be able to acquire something for someone who's not there, we couldn't even do it to do zechia, which is shlo b'fanav, which is not in front of them, first of all, and then it's for a fetus who hasn't been born yet. That would be too much of a stretch. But Shmuel felt that it wasn't too much of a stretch. Okay, so this last thing right here was just had nothing to do with our sugya. We're just saying that sometimes when you want to give up sake, you want people to know, you want to gather a mini. And so as a machlokas between Rabbi and Rav Nachman, if when you want to publicize a drasha, do you need to give it in front of 10 scholars or just any 10 people? Let me tell you that when we had that special Masorah dinner, when was it? 11 years ago or whatever, when the Ari Zvitovsky and Ari, Greenspan come and eat the foods that they have traditions. They went from Yemenite people and this people that this species is a kosher species. So at the dinner, they took a certain bird, like it's like a chicken, except it wasn't a chicken. And they said, we have a tradition that this is a kosher species and we're passing it along to you. Now, I don't know if anyone in the room, was a zoologist or, anyone who could tell the species apart. But from the mitzvah Mesorah of transmitting the Mesorah, so by them announcing it publicly is similar to what this Gemara is saying right here. That to make an important psak, you should do it publicly. Okay, 2 dots. Tanu Rabbanan. We are at the end of 7b2, the last few lines of the right paragraph, of the right column. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso, Mavorchen birkas chasanim beveis chasanim. We make the blessings of the grooms in the house of the grooms, meaning at the chuppah time, not at the time of because remember, there's the eirusin, there's the what we call the engagement. That's when you give the ring, and then there's when they actually are married, when they have chuppah or when he brings her into the house. So we learned in the Brayso that the birkas chasanim is said in the house of the chasanim, meaning not at the time of when the marriage process begins with giving the ring, but it's when the marriage process gets completed, when the kala enters his house. Now, based on this statement, birkas chasanim beveis chasanim, in the house of chasanim, I believe that Reb Chaim said that if the wedding is happening not in the chasan's home, the chasan has to have some type of ownership stake in that place, else it's not at his house. So in a hotel, when you rent the hall or the banquet hall, whatever, so then it's his enough for the extent that it's considered the house of the chasan to make the bracha. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afaves eirusin mevarchenosa. Rabbi Yehuda says even when they get engaged, that the chasan gives the ring to the kala, you also have to make the birkas chasanim. Amar Abaye, but Abaye qualifies his statement. He says, "Uvi Yehuda shanu mipnei shemisyached ima." That's only talking about in the area of Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, in that geographic area, because in the tribe of Yehuda, they had the chasan and kala do yichud, be secluded together in a room, even at the engagement time. So Rishonim point out and bend backwards and forwards to saying that they were not consummating any type of marriage now because it was not permitted until the chuppah, but they were doing it whatever in order that they should love each other or this or that. The intentions were l'shem shamayim, but that was the practice in Yehuda. Tani idach, we have another brayso. Mavarchen birkas chasanim beveis chasanim uveches eirusin beveis eirusin. We make the blessing of the grooms in the house of the groom, and the birkas eirusin, the bracha of the engagement, in the eirusin house. So birkas eirusin my mavarech. So what is the bracha for birkas eirusin? Ravin bar Rav Ada v'Rabba bar Rav Ada travayu mishmei Rav Yehuda Amri. Ravin bar Rav Ada and Rabba bar Rav Ada. So I don't know if they were brothers or not. It both said that they were the son of Rav Ada. They both said the name of Rav Yehuda Amri. They would say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam. Bless you, Hashem, our God, the King of the universe. Asher Kedeshanu Mitzosav. He sanctified us with his mitzvos. V'tzivanu ala arayos. He commanded us against the incestual forbidden relationships. V'asur lanu as haarusos, and he forbade us to be with our engaged partners. V'hitar lanu as hanesuos, and he permitted the married women, meaning the second stage, al yedei chuppah v'kiddushin, through chuppah and kiddushin. Now, our text, we actually add one letter. V'hitar lanu as hanesuos lanu, al yedei chuppah v'kiddushin. That's the way that we make the bracha. And Rav Acha berei de Rava Mesayim le bishmei Rav Yehuda Baruch Atah Hashem Ekadosh Yisrael Yedei Chuppah V'Kiddushin. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said that according to Rav Yehuda, you ended it with the bracha also, and you say Baruch Atah Hashem, who sanctifies Yisrael through Chuppah and Kiddushin. Ma'id l'chas amidi dehavi berchos peiros v'berchos mitzvos. So the Bar Ada brothers, or perhaps not brothers, they didn't say Baruch Atah Hashem at the end because they held it was just like a bracha on food. It's a short bracha, which just says Baruch Atah Hashem Kamach Olam, whatever. Or a regular brachos mitzvah. Al Natilas Lulav. Or Al, it was just Hanukkah, so Al Kriyas Halal. Likras Halal, excuse me. Uman dechasim midi dehavi akidusha. And Rav Acha berei de Rava, who says you make the bracha at the end, they hold it's like Kiddush. Now, what's the pshat in like Kiddush? Rashi says something which to me isn't the simplest explanation. He says because Kiddushin, marriage, which is also the a term for the eirusin, the first stage of marriage, is from the word sanctify. And Kiddush that we say for Shabbos or Yantif is sanctifying the day. So because it's a Kiddush, just like Kiddush, we end with the bracha. We end this bracha with Baruch Hashem also. But then Rashi says, which seems to be more of the pshat, he doesn't say this is a separate answer. He says in Kiddush we have some stuff that's slightly off topic. The kiho yom techila mikra kodesh zechel etzias mitzrayim. Well, maybe the zechel etzias mitzrayim may not be extraneous. That might be part of Kiddush. So just like so when we learned Arvei Psachim and we learned about the brachos stuff, we mentioned that long brachos start with the baruch and end with the baruch. So I would Rashi is not rejecting that answer, but he doesn't say that as the just straight out, is that this bracha is already a little bit long. Because he sanctified us with their mitzvahs. That's part of every bracha mitzvah. He commanded us on the arayos, v'tzivanuli cross halal, like we just said in halal. But then we add a few other phrases. V'asar lanu haarusos. He forbade us to be with our betrothed. V'hitur lanu hanusos adei chuppah v'kedusha. And he permitted us, if we had nusu in the second stage of marriage, through chuppah v'kedusha. So because it has multiple ideas, it becomes a long bracha. It's not just one, even though the whole idea is about marriage, but there's a lot of different details in there. So it becomes a long bracha, so it has to end with the baruch also. Okay, very important thing that so any questions on that? So this is the bracha we make, which we make it under the chuppah, but this is only when they give the ring. It's only on the eirusin. This isn't the sheva brachos. That's the birkas chasanim. This is the birkas eirusin. So one thing that we have to mention here is that it says the asar lanu haarusos, that we are forbidden to be with our betrothed. We have to wait to consummate the marriage till after the nesuin. So according to most opinions, this is only rabbinic. On a Torah level, you would be allowed to consummate your marriage with your betrothed after you give the ring before chuppah. However, the Ravid in the Shitz Mekubetzes here, Rav Aaron, of course, mentioned this shita, and then I mentioned it over to a different big Rav who actually had learned by Rav Yashaber until 1958. So one of the earlier students in Yeshiva University, not the earliest, but certainly one of the earlier groups. And he got very upset. He has a huge Svarim collection, and he took out a book of someone who was trying to write some type of encyclopedia type thing about things. He says, how come he didn't mention that shita? Meaning he completely believed me 100% about this Ravid, and he was complaining about a different author who wrote a book and didn't mention the Ravid's opinion. So Rav Aaron explained the Ravid based on, it's interesting to know because it's important to know the Pshuto Shel Mikra. When the pasuk says Kikach Isha, so which is the pasuk of getting married. I mean, obviously, it's also said in context of divorce, but you have to get married before you get divorced. So, kikach ish isha, when a man takes a woman, means they got married. So there's an opinion of Rabbeinu Nisim Gaon, that Tosos mentions it on Daf Yod in Kiddushin, mentions a certain pshat, and Tosos asks on his pshat because he says b'kashal perusho, his pshat is difficult. The kicha gabi Kiddushin ksiv v'lo mayri b'chuppah klal. Kicha is talking about Gzer Shava, that we learn that you can get married by giving a ring or by giving something of monetary value, because we learned it out from making an acquisition of buying property. Not that a woman is property, but just like we know that ticha, to take something, if you take something in a normal course of a transaction, you could use money. We learned just like ki yikach ish isha, when you marry a woman, you could also use money to betroth her. So Tosos, they're asked, but that kicha is talking about kiddushin, the eirusin, the first stage of marriage, and not chuppah. So for whatever reason, Rabbi Nisim Gaon holds that ki yikach ish isha is not talking about eirusin, but it's talking about nesuin. So the Rabbi, which is not the main opinion, and this most Rishonim say that asar lanu haarusos, that their betrothed are forbidden, is only rabbinic. But the Rabbi who says that it's on a Torah level would hold like Rabbeinu Nisim Gaon that the pasuk ki kach ish isha is talking about nesuin, the second and final stage of marriage, not the first stage of marriage. Okay, second line from the bottom. Tana Rabbana. Mevarchen birkas chasanim asar kol shiva. We make the bracha of birkas chasanim with a minyan for all 7 days. Amrav Yehuda v'hu shabo panim chadashos. So that's when you have a new face. So Rashi says, Rashi says that you have a new person who wasn't there yesterday. Some Rishonim say that it was someone who was not at the wedding. And Tosos is very important. Tosos says, and most Hasidim don't hold like this Tosos. I don't know why. The Panach Hadashos ain't. Tosos says that the Panach Hadashos, the new faces that you're allowed to make the birkas chasanim, is someone who's they're adding to the simcha by them being there. And then Tosos, so the Hasidim, they look for a random person. They go to the street to say, "Oh, we need to say Sheva Brachos. Can you come in?" Because they don't have anyone new. So a random person on the street is not adding simcha because they don't know the person. Now the thing is that sometimes if you add that much joy, why don't you invite them to the wedding? So so sometimes it is people who were invited to the wedding and couldn't be at the wedding, so then they come to a Sheva Brachos. So that you have also. So my Mavarech. So Tosos mentions, I don't remember if the Gemara mentions it here or not, is that Shabbos is upon Chadashos. So according to Tosos, so you don't even need a physical person, but there has to be something that's adding to the simcha. So according to Tosos, it seems because we have to cook extra for Shabbos anyway, when the Sheva Brachos comes on Shabbos, Shabbos is adding something to the simcha. My Mavarech, what's the brachos? Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so this is what you've been waiting for. For 40 minutes already. We're saying, what are the birkas chasanim that we're talking about? So the first one, Rabbi Yehuda says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shehakol bara lichvodo. Everything was created for his honor. The second bracha, v'yotzer ha'adam. Hashem created or formed man. The third one, v'asher yatzer ha'adam b'tzalmo. He created man in his image, b'tzalm demus tavniso. In a tzalam is the form of his anatomy or the way that he is built. And he fixed for him a permanent, a binyan, a building that would be lasting. Baruch Hashem Yotzer Adam. So that was number 3. So the first one is shahakol, but it's not shahakol that we make on food. The second one is Yotzer Adam. And the third one is Asher Yotzer, but it's not the Asher Yotzer of the bathroom. But there's same idea of Hashem forming us. The barren one should be very happy and rejoicing. As her sons gather with her happiness. Bless you, Hashem, who makes Tzion, Yerushalayim, happy with her sons. So this is including Yerushalayim. Samech tesamach reim ahuvim k'samechacha yitzercha beganeda mikedem brochat Hashem b'samech chasan b'kala. The beloved friends should be very happy, like he made you happy, like Hashem who formed you made you happy in Gan Eden, mikedem, either in the east or mikedem earlier in history. Blessed are you, Hashem, who makes the chasan and kala happy. And then Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bara sasam v'simcha chasan v'kala gila rina ditza v'chedo abba v'yachva v'shalom v'reus, who created happiness and joy, chasan and kala, then a whole bunch of different synonyms for rejoicing and happiness and exaltation, and then ava, love, and ba'achva, brotherhood, v'shalom, and peace, v'reus, and brotherhood, a different or friendship. Achva is more of a brother, and rea is more of, might be closer than a brother, but it's a beloved. Mehera shamalkinu yishama be'ara v'Yehuda v'chotzos Yerushalayim. Soon Hashem our God may it be heard in the cities of Yehuda and the streets of Yerushalayim. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatzon v'kol kala, the sound of happiness, the sound of rejoicing, the sound of a chasan, the sound of a kala. Kol mitalos chasanim michupasam, unarim b'mishen eginasam, the sound of happiness of the grooms from their chuppahs and the lads from their feasts that had music at it. Baruch atah Hashem v'samech chasan im hakala. Bless you, Hashem, who makes the chasan happy with the kala. Now, the previous one was misamech chasan v'kala, and this is misamech chasan im hakala. With, not and. Okay, so Rashi goes through a lot of details to comparing this historically, because Hashem created Adam first by himself, and then when Adam couldn't find his mate, he amputated part of Adam, whether it was his, the rib, like we say, or maybe that Adam and Chava were almost like Siamese twins, that there was a front and a back, but they couldn't see each other because one was facing this way and the other one was facing the other way. And then Hashem did the rib, that was where they were attached, to detach them so that they could reunite in marriage and things like that. Also, it's a huge sugya here about why are some of the brachos start with baruch and some of them don't. So the basic answer, though there are a lot of discussions about it, is that a short bracha starts baruch atah Hashem. And even though we have a principle that if a bracha is next to another bracha, it doesn't start with baruch atah Hashem, most Rishonim say that if it's a short bracha, it starts baruch atah Hashem. And we've mentioned this example many times. Shmona Esrei starts baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoseinu, and we go on and it says baruch atah Hashem Magen Avraham. So it starts with the bracha and ends with the bracha. And then Ata Gibor, the second bracha, because it's adjacent. So the bracha, it doesn't have to start with baruch. It starts Ata Gibor, but because it's right next to a bracha, it's connected, it doesn't have to start with the baruch. So how come some of these brachos, so the second bracha and the third bracha, even the third bracha, Asher Yatzar Sadam Mitzamo, starts Baruch Atah Hashem, and that also ends Baruch Atah Hashem. So the Rishonim spend they discuss at length how come the rules don't seem to follow here. Rav Aaron at one time said the rules for brachos, there's more exceptions than there are that actually follow the rule. But because a bracha is so short, like the beginnings, you don't have it start without a bracha and then say baruch at the end. And then Yotzer, Asher Yotzer Sadam Mitzamo, that starts with baruch. Tos Tasis does not start with baruch. That's adjacent to previous bracha. Samech to Samach is adjacent. It doesn't start with baruch, and those are also reasonably length. And then the last bracha is a question, because that's a long bracha, but it's next to a previous. So how come it starts with baruch also? So I think we're going to say later on that because if we're going to learn if there's not panim chadashos, so if there's then you don't make the 7 brachos, but that one bracha you still make. So since that bracha is often a standalone bracha, as a standalone bracha, it has to start with the baruch. So even when it's part of the series of brachos, it also starts with baruch. Levi ikla lebei Rabbi behilula Rabbi Shimon Berei. Levi went to the house of Rabbi in the party, meaning the wedding of Rabbi Shimon, his son. Baruch Chamish. He made only 5 brachos. So this is only 6 brachos. So the 7th bracha is Borei Pri Hagafen. Now, under the chuppah, Borei Pri Hagafen is the first bracha, and at benching and during the Sheva brachos for the 7 days afterwards, Borei Pri Hagafen is the last bracha. So which five did he make? Rashi says that he didn't say Asher Yatzar Yotzer Adam. It seems that he skipped what according to ours is the second bracha. So I mean, again, our Gemara listed five and didn't say. So of the things we mentioned, we have Shahakal Baruch Vodo, Yotzer Adam, Asher Yotzer Sodom Talmo, Sos Tasis, Samech Tasamach, and then Asher Bara 6. So he skipped within ours is the second bracha. Rav Asi Ikla Lebei Rav Ashi Belula Demar Bere. Rav Asi went. So this is several generations later, because Rabbi Levi going to Bey Rabbi, that's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the redactor of the Mishnah. Rav Asi went to the wedding of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi was the redactor of the Gemara, so it was 300 years later or something like that. Baruch Shis, he made 6 brachas, which he included, according to Rashi, Yotzer Adam. So lema b'hakam miflagi, demar savar chadi yitzir avoy, umar savar shtei yitzir savoy. So let's say the argument is, was Adam and Chava considered one creation, or was it 2 different creations? So Rashi says that when Hashem built the rib, that they originally had 2 different faces. The Zachar was facing one way and the Keva was the other way. And so when Hashem separated them, it wasn't a separate act of creation. Whereas according to Rav Asi, who made the other bracha, there was 2 creations. One was creating Adam initially, and then one was creating Chava, that making her was enough of. So Rashi says that this was according to the opinion that what Hashem did was Adam had like a tail-like protrusion, and Hashem created Chava from that tail, so it's like she was created later than Adam. According to the first opinion, they were created at the same time, but later Hashem had to separate them because they were like Siamese twins. And according to this, to the one who made Asher Yatzar and Yotzer Adam and Asher Yatzar, it was more of that 2 creations, one for man and one for woman. So the Gemara says, "Lo, everyone agrees that there was only one Yetzira, one act of creation. One says we follow Hashem's initial thought, and one say we follow Hashem's deed. Meaning, in the thought, Hashem created them as one, but then later he had to separate Adam and Chava. But Basar Maisa, following what Hashem actually did, was he made. Okay, Rashi says if we follow Hashem's machshava, Hashem's thought, in his thought there was to make 2 created, but then he created them as one. So does that mean that? I'm just saying, it's according to Rashi, it's not clear if Hashem's machshava was creating 2, and therefore need 2 brachos, and his action he only created them 1, and then later he had to, make a surgery lahavdil to separate Chava from Adam, or do we say Basar Machshava means he made them as one, but then because of technical reasons, Hashem had to then put Adam under anesthetic and then surgically make Chava. So which one is the one and which is the 2? It's not clear from this Gemara which one's which. Gihad Rav Yehuda Rami, similar to a fact that Rav Yehuda said that there's 2 psukim that seem to contradict each other. Vayivra Elokim as Adam b'tzalmo. It says Hashem created man in His image. Uksiv Zachar nekeva bara. He created them male and female. So how could it be? If it's in the image of Hashem, it wouldn't be male or female. So Hakeitzad. So how can we explain the 2 psukim? Keita b'tchila alav machshav libar shnayim. Or he seems to the fact that Zachar nekeva is a lack of unity. There's 2 different types, and Hashem is unity. So originally Hashem thought to create them as 2, but then he ended up creating them as 1, And then obviously he had to then separate Chava from Ada. Rav Ashi ikul bei Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi was by the house of Rav Kahana. Yom Kama Baruch Kulhu. On the first day, he made all of the brachos, mikan va'elach, but after the first day, I'ika panim chadashos Baruch Kulu. If there was new faces who came, he made all the brachos, bimlav, pushe simcha ba'almahu. And if there weren't new people, this one word, I'm not sure how to translate it. Oh, apushe simcha ba'almahu, it's just an extension of the simcha. Mevarach simcha b'mono va'asher bara. So he made simcha b'mono and asher bara. So because there's no new joy by new people coming, it's only an extension of the previous thing. So simcha b'mono is the special mizumin. The special mizumin rabosayin of arech, we say simcha b'mono, so that's part of the mizumin. And he only made asher bara, we call the last bracha. Mishiva v'yad shloshim, from after the 7 days until 30 days, bein amar lehu machmasilulo vein lo. Whether the meal was in honor of the wedding or not in honor of the wedding, he made the special mezumin shasimcha b'mono. Mikan va'elach, but after the 30 days, if they said that the feast, that the meal was in honor of the chasan kala, they would make a shasimcha b'mono. Lo. But if they didn't say that the meal was in honor of the chasan kala, then they would make a regular mezumin. So where did this come up? When Lester Farber brought his daughter and son-in-law in for a kiddush after they got married. It was several months later, but it was in honor of the wedding. So Ellie said, when we were on Friday night, Ellie said, the reason they're here is to celebrate the wedding. We have to say Shasimcha Bimon. And Ellie's right. That's what the Gemara says. That's what the, well, I don't know if the Shulchan Aruch, but I think we found in the Aruch HaShulchan Paskins. So any meal that's in honor of the newlyweds for a whole year, you wouldn't make the Shabbat brachos, but you would say the special mizumah of Shasimcha Bimono. Now, some Rishonim point out, why don't we make the bracha of Shasimcha Bimono for a bris milah? That's a happy occasion too. So they say that it's not happy for the kid; he's in pain. So when do you say this in pain? Yeah. So Rabbi Sain of Arech in the Mizumin, we add some special. We actually say a whole extra thing. Well, even for Friday night, if for dinner here. So it's on page 204 in the Siddur Yehisham Devei Aser V'Gam Haron, and then we say B'Shus the Baruch Lekinu Simcha B'Mono V'Shachan V'Shalom. So the main thing is that we had the Shushat Simcha B'Mono, then the respondents say Baruch Lekinu Simcha B'Mono V'Shachan V'Shalom. So because they were there, they were in town, and they were the whole thing for Shabbos was in honor of their wedding. A few months later, so we made Shasim Pamimono at the Mezumin. Ad Emas, excuse me. So how long? If it's their 5th wedding anniversary, or even someone's golden wedding anniversary, is it an extension of the wedding? It's a good question, right? So ad emas ad tracer amra papish made the rabba ad tracer yarche shasa, 12-month year. So I mean it means 12 months. It's a little bit strange in the English we wouldn't say it, but the 12 months. Ume karma emas, and how early? Let's say you're having engagement parties after they got married, but before the chuppah, would you make Shasimcha Bimono also? So Amra Papa Mechiramu Sariba Sisna. When they would put the water on the barley to make the beer. Which means that they're making preparations for the wedding. Ini is that so, Papa Yasik La'aba Marbere, but Rapapa was making preparations for the wedding for Abba Mar, his son, Ubarach Mishas eirusin. And as soon as the eirusin happened, he already started saying Shasimcha Bimono. And that was earlier than the time of making the beer. So Shani Rapapa, the Havitarachle. So no, so Rapapa is different, because he, he made the preparations for the wedding for Abba Mar, his son, Ubarach Mishas eirusin. And as soon as the eirusin happened, he already started saying Shasimcha Bimono. And that was earlier than the time of making the beer. So Shani Rapapa is different, because he So ArtScroll chance. It's not a Rashi here. ArtScroll seems to be quoting a Rashi in Arvei Psachim that he was rich, so the preparations. So he didn't have to wait, to save up his money to make the preparations. He was able to start making preparations from the very beginning. Ravina Iasikle Livrei Bei Rav Chaviva. Ravina was making wedding preparations for his son with someone from the house of Rav Chaviva, meaning Rav Chaviva's daughter. Ubarach Mishas eirusin. He also made the bracha, the mezumet shasimcha bimono from the time of eirusin. Amar, he said, Kumle b'gavayad lahavi hadribu. I know that they're not going to break the engagement. Lo istayam milsa v'hadribu, except it didn't have help. I mean, we say the word siyata d'shmaya, so it didn't work, and they ended up breaking off. Breaking it off. So it seems, according to what he was saying, the reason is when you start making preparations for the wedding is that it's not going to be broken off at that stage. Rav Tachlifa bar Marava, Rav Tachlifa from Eretz Yisrael, Ikla Bavel. He went to Bavel. Baruch Shis he made the sixth brach. He made the sixth long, meaning he started with Baruch and ended with the Baruch. And we do not paskin like him. Rav Chaviva Ikla Behula. Rav Chaviva went. I don't know if it was the same Rav Chaviva whose daughter ended up not getting married to Ravina's son. He went to a bris, Baruch Simcha B'Mimono, and he made the birkas azimon. He said Simcha B'Mimono. V'leiselchus akavase mishum the tride, the east later the yanuke. But we don't pass like him because they're concerned. The parents are concerned because the baby is in pain, so it's not full simcha. Now we also say it's not exactly this halacha, and we'll leave it here. But how come we don't make a shachiyanu at a bris? One of the reasons is because it's not so happy because the baby's in pain. And for that, some say also because the baby, maybe the baby isn't gonna, in those days, it was not, the infant mortality was much higher. So it was more important that the baby would reach a milestone of 30 days to be considered that, is out of the woods of not being dying due to the high infant mortality rates. Let's word it that way. So because we weren't certain of that, they don't make a shachiyanu at the bris, but at a pidyon aben, they definitely do make a shachiyanu. So that's not the same halacha as this, but there is a bit of a relation. This was talking about shasimcha bimono, and I just mentioned shachiyanu, which our Gemara is not talking about. So we'll leave it here, and Mirza Hashem next week.